Sport and physical activity are major cultural forms which come to dominate so much of our everyday lives. But what happens when you think critically about sport? When you break down some of the taken for granted and most celebrated aspects of sporting culture? That is what we do in this film, and we discuss the ways in which our research at the University of Bath connects sport to a variety of social problems, social concerns and social relations. In so doing, we highlight the importance of studying sport and the impact that sport has upon our everyday lives. Sport is such a pervasive and popular cultural form, therefore it's fully deserving of critical academic study as much as the philosophy, history, the classics and so on. To study sport critically then and seriously requires a number of tools and approaches. For example, we use approaches from media studies, cultural studies, gender studies, from sociology, from social policy, from history, from philosophy, psychology, and a variety of other disciplines. And I think that's what makes what we do at Bath unique. It's bringing together all of these approaches, working with all these approaches to really look critically and understand sport as a site of social relations, of social problems and of social concerns. The study of sport is so important because of the potential impact it can have, not just on our own everyday lives, but also on wider social issues. So, for example, sport has a major role in political policies with relation to criminality, to deviance, to governing young people. It has an impact on the health of the nation with regard to, for example, physical education curriculum. Sport is increasingly used by corporations and by non-government entities such as the United Nations with regard to international development and making a difference in people's lives in relation to sexual health, in relation to gender-based violence. And so really understanding sport and understanding the ways in which it can be used to make a difference and intervene into everyday lives, both in a positive and in a negative way, provides the purpose and the meaning for the critical study of sport at Bath. There are a number then of social, economic and health-related impacts that our work can have, but importantly all of our work at Bath is underscored by one big question, and that big question is really the relationships between sport, power and social justice. In particular, what we're really focused on is understanding how sport as a cultural form and therefore as a site of power relations can serve to disadvantage some people and advantage others. In this sense, all of our work then is really centred on issues surrounding power, social justice, around inequality, equality, inclusion and exclusion, and also thinking of sport as a form of resistance to dominant power relations. So our work at Bath can really be broken down into two key, albeit interrelated areas. The first of these is thinking about sport as a popular cultural form. The second is research into the active and inactive, healthy and unhealthy body. So sport is one of the most central components of popular culture. It dominates our newspapers, our television screens, our forms of interactive play, for example, through various forms of social media and interactive gaming technologies. It's the subject of documentaries. It forms a central part of our history and indeed a central part of our national culture. Sport, of course, then, is big business. But what happens when you peek behind that spectacle, behind the glitzy popular cultural form, and start to look at sport as a site of power relations, and start to think about the various relationships, be they political, be they military, which sport is involved with. And take politics, the way in which sport is used as a form of national celebration, or as a form of resistance, or as a political tool, for example in the Cold War, in boycotting various Olympic Games, or perhaps in the way in which sport acted as a site of resistance in 1968 by Tommy Smith and John Carlos with the famous Black Glove salute in Mexico City in 1968, or perhaps the way in which sport following the terror attacks in 9/11 was used as a site of sort of national harmony to bring together, albeit mythical, the United States as a nation. Take but one example, and this could be any major sporting spectacle, a major event such as an Olympics, a Commonwealth Games, or a World Cup, or football, or whatever other major sport. And we would take that event and ask certain questions of that event through our approach at the University of Bath. The opening ceremonies of such major events, of course, become the window which the world has into that particular city, and therefore these opening ceremonies are often spaces in which particular national histories are told and indeed sold to the rest of the world. And again, questions abound with regard to the type of histories which are incorporated and which are glossed over in such spectacles. For example, there's unlikely to be a great dwelling on conflict and internal strife. It's likely to gloss over conflict, division, any areas of social problems or social concerns. So therefore, the package which is produced for the rest of the world to consume is one which is more than likely to be highly superficial, a highly mediated and glossy version of national identity. And then the question has to be asked, how does that then relate to everyday lived experience, to diversity, to multiculturalism, to social divisions at home, and to various forms of exclusion within the host nation?
We're very interested in understanding how the body is experienced, understood and consumed in popular culture through sport. We're quite literally from head to toe imbued with values, meanings and power relations which help us to understand our physicality. So we're very interested in understanding that process here at Bath, and in particular looking at the different contexts through which people learn what it might mean to be, for example, healthy or physically inactive or fit. What do those labels mean, and what effect do they have in terms of how we understand ourselves? So, by way of example, there's been somewhat of a moral panic around obesity, that we're in a crisis, an epidemic, and that we must all lose weight, improve our diets and be more physically active. And these are very powerful messages which can have negative effects actually. So one example of that is the way in which we tend to think about health in very simplistic terms as a matter of weight rather than other aspects of health such as well-being. Another negative effect is the increase in disordered relationships with food and an increase in very negative body images. The media is one of many powerful forms of public spaces through which we learn. And in recent years, we've seen new forms of media, so social media applications, reality television programs that are specifically geared towards health, physicality, and the body. We use these spaces to go and understand, experience, and learn about not just our own bodies, but other people's bodies. So we might think about these contexts of learning in relation to, for example, a young woman who is learning about her body, physicality, through being physically active, but through peer culture, through reality television, through new technologies, applications such as calorie counters or websites online. She might compare her body image, her sense of self, her body, in relation to these often unobtainable, idealised images that we see in these spaces. So the types of questions that we would ask through our research here at Bath relate to how does she understand her body in relation to these images? How might those experiences impact on her understanding and her opportunity to be physically active? So these are very powerful and persuasive sites of learning. These contexts and the messages about our bodies are important because they provide us with a set of resources through which we come to understand our bodies. We internalise those and we use them in our everyday lives. And quite often this can be with negative or dangerous effects. For example, disordered relationships with food.
We live in what are complex times, and sports and physical activity are often seen as diversions from the travails and the tragedies of everyday life. Yet, it is anything but a diversion. In conceptualising sport and physical activity, what we're able to do is open the door for the critical academic study of sport into areas in which it hasn't really ventured before, into areas which connect it to social problems and social concerns and reveal the impact it can have, the conversations that understanding sport can have with, for example, public debate, with policy debates, with political debates. To understand society, to intervene into some of the most pressing social problems of our time requires an understanding of the influence that sport can have not only on our everyday lives but on society as a whole.